Last week, we came up with this program to calculate the area of a triangle using base and height, and then calculate how many cans of paint we needed. So we put all of our code in the main method. Let's just quickly step through this to recall how this works. And you can go through the details if you look back at last week. And so basically we've got our scanner, we're prompting for the length of the base, and we already put our input in of 100 for the length of the base. So we're reading it right here with next double, and we see that it was read into the base variable. And then prompting, and now we're going to read in the next double, so 20, and read it into the variable height. We just did that. And now we've got a calculation here, base times height, and we're using floating point. These are doubles, so we get the fractional part. If we just did this, it would end up 0 because that's integer math. Both sides of the division are integer, it's integer math. How many, it would just end up, instead of 0.5, it would end up 0. So, area, we calculate it, and now square inches per can. We've got a constant. We know this is a constant because all uppercase. We forgot to do the final, so we'll add that here shortly to make sure that the compiler basically makes sure that this doesn't change. But the all upper characters are an indication to the programmer that this isn't supposed to change. It's a common convention. Okay. And then, so we assign that value, and we're using a name rather than a number, because why does this magic number help us? And by naming it, we know that. Okay, calculate the area, and we'll print it out. So we need 20 cans of paint. Okay. And actually, we should fix a couple of problems here. That it should be whole number of cans, right? We don't need this. This really should be an int because it's a whole number. And then this really should be final because the value does not change of a constant. And then we're going to have a value here, and we don't want to do the calculation and then cast the result to an int. So we've got a double calculation, floating point calculation, and we've got to explicitly cast it to an integer. And so a couple of improvements to our program, and we jump through and we get 20. Okay, so that's our starting point. Now, as we look through our code, we'd like to break it up into smaller pieces. And one area, this is kind of a general thing, right? Calculate the area of a triangle using base and height. And in programming languages, one of the biggest challenges we face is complexity. And so can we take reusable parts or potentially reusable parts and put them in their own code own area that we're able to test, and then just reuse them instead of having to remember this equation and type it in and get it right in the Java syntax. And this is a fairly simple case, but this idea applies as we're going forward. So let's just create a method like we've learned to do this week. So create a new method, and basically, given base and height, we want to return area, and we're going to return a double value. So double, and it'll be calculate area, and we're given double base, double height. Okay, so this is called the method header. Method header, public, basically that means anybody that can see the class can see this, any code, but we'll get to that late in the course. Static means to call this within this class, we just refer to the name. Outside of the class, we'd have to say, what is the class name dot method name. Okay, for our purposes right now, that's what static means. Double is the return value. What value will be returned from this method? And then we have our parameter list. Parameter list specifies what kind of values, what kind of arguments, the data types of the arguments that need to be passed into this method in order for it to do its work. If you've got a mathematical background, then a method here is simply a function in mathematics. Okay? So, basically, we just need this. And since our parameter is named the same, those don't change. Double. And so we need to return area. So for any method that has a return type other than void, then we've got to say what value to return. So we're returning the value within area, which is of data type double. Okay. So I'll also simplify this. So it's pretty clear, hopefully, what this is. Let's create a java.comment, and then calculates the area of a triangle given the base and height. Okay, and so we can say param base, the length of the base of the triangle, and then at param height. So basically the first token here is the variable name. First token after param is the variable name param. The length of the height of the triangle. And maybe there's better wording, but that's a start, and we may want to tweak our wording and stuff. Return, what do we return? The area of the triangle. Okay, so coming up with a java.comment /**, and we'll see that this is what the API documentation is from. And we ask you to create these for the methods you write in this course. If you write a method, basically you're asked to create this to tell us what's going on. And so we'll document it here as well. And this calculates the number of cans of paint for painting a triangle. Okay, we've got a parameter here, and right now args, and we can just say unused because it is, and there is nothing returned. Okay, so just basic commenting. Now our program, so our class has this method, but we have not yet used it. We're still doing the calculation this way. But what we want to do is call that. And so I'm going to change this. Let me do the new one, is assigned calculate area. So instead of doing the calculation here, I'm going to call this method, and I'm going to pass it the base and height. And so I'm going to say base height. Okay. And then I can get rid of this. So instead of doing the calculation here, this code becomes a little bit simpler, hopefully easier to read. We're going to call this method. We can just use the name since it's in the same class, and it's a static method. So we can just use the name. And instead of calculating it here, basically this is calling the method. That means get the current value in base, get the current value in height. Those are the arguments that get passed into these parameters, the variables within this method. And then we'll do the calculation and we'll return from this method the area. That will return us to this area code. We save the value in this area variable, and then we can continue executing this. So let's see this happen in memory. Okay, so this is defining a method. This is calling the method. So same program, same data, and it should result in the same value. So this is called refactoring. We're changing the structure of the program, improving the structure, but keeping the behavior of the program the same. Okay, the result is the same. So let's execute this, and I'll just drag this to be a little bit wider. And over here, recall we're learning a little bit more about memory. Frames, these are the stack frames, and we'll see this in more detail now. Initially, we've got the main frame, and then when we call this method, we'll see another frame pop up on the stack. So this is the stack, this is the heap. We're not worried too much about the heap at this point. Okay, so let's just watch what happens. We read in our values just as before. Okay, so they're in the main method stack frame, these variables. Okay, since these variables were declared within main, they're within the stack frame of main. Now notice the next line to be executed. Instead of the calculation, we're going to call the method. And notice what happens in memory when we call the method. We step forward, we get another stack frame, okay, and a new base and a height. And so the values that were passed in here are used to initialize these new variables, these new parameters. So these are parameter variable declarations. Parameters are variable declarations. So notice there's two base variables, two height variables. They happen to be the same, named the same, but they're distinctly different. Okay? Now, calculate area, that's the current method being executed. So we're going to use base and height and do the multiplication, calculate the result, so we get an area, and now we're going to return that to our calling method. Okay, notice what happens when we return from this method. This will go away. We'll have the value, so the value coming back will be returned, but this memory is now deallocated. It is freed to be used by another part of your problem, by another part of your program. Okay, so that memory no longer exists, but the result of this is the returned value. So notice that area is now 1,000. So if we step up, it doesn't have it, it does. Okay, so evaluating an expression. And notice what happened prior when we did this, when we executed this method, next double. The result of this is a value that was read in and put in the height variable. Here we created our own method in our own class, and when we execute that method, it returns a value. So this expression of calling a method results in a value, and then in this case, whatever's on the right side of assignment is saved into the variable on the left. So now we can continue with our calculation, calculate the number of cans, and print it out. Okay, so same result, but we've taken an area of code, segment of code, and created a method for it. In the next video, we're going to talk about how to test this method. Okay, once we have this method tested, then we could reuse it in different places, and we don't need to typically retest it, although we easily can, and we'll show you how to do that. But we can reuse this. We can forget about the details and just use the name. Okay, and hopefully this is clarifying our program to be a little bit easier to read, and not everything has to be in main.